This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
Welcome to Is It Philosophy? Here we are the seekers of truth. We are the askers of the questions. We are the answerers of those questions? Maybe, I don't know. Each episode, myself and a guest or two will start with a question. Then we will set out on a journey to find an answer. In the end, it's up to you to determine, is it philosophy? All right, everybody, we are back for another episode. I am joined today by Brandon Croud from the Lapped podcast. Lapped Traffic. Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So today's topic, I feel, needs a disclaimer on my part.
Okay.
I am not a sports fanatic. I know a little bit of hockey. That's about it. The guys I work with are sports crazy. They do the fantasy football, the whole everything. So today's topic is, should professional athletes make as much money as they do? And to start off, I'm going to throw this at you and hear what you have to say first.
Okay. So, when you asked everyone in the Big Heads Network thing to, maybe go sign up, I was scrolling through. I'm like, I really like this topic because it can be viewed from so many different perspectives. You can view it from the average sports fan that just is a casual watcher, depending on if they're maybe at a bar, friend's house, something like that. That's going to generate one opinion. I think you'll have your diehard sports fans that'll generate another one. Your business people will generate one. I think there are so many different perspectives that this question and topic can take, and not necessarily any of them are wrong. But just to kind of give an idea of where I'm coming from and where my opinion is going to be generated from, I consider myself a diehard sports fan. I must, in that I spend a lot of time doing a podcast that's based around a sport that, I don't get paid for. I like sports. It's a great, relaxer for me, even though I get, caught up in the heat of the moment sometimes. But that said, I'll start with, I don't have a problem with what professional athletes make. It's a privatized business, and capital markets really drive things in that area. It's supply and demand. And if somebody's willing to pay, then I don't necessarily have an issue from that regard. And, we can get deeper here as you maybe chime in here with your take on it. But, it's a capital market driven sector of entertainment. And from that regard, if someone's willing to pay X amount for a player, that might mean, depending on what sport we're talking about, if there's cap space or something like that, that another player may not be able to make as much. If you look at the Detroit Lions, for example, 15% of their entire salary is stretched out across three guys, yet they've got a 64-man roster, so I'm sure some of those guys maybe have a problem, but everybody wants to get paid in today's society.
Oh, yeah, totally. I don't have a problem necessarily with the free market end of it. To me, it's the whole idea of these guys are making millions and millions of dollars, and depending on the sport, all they're doing is chasing a ball, right, or a football or a puck or a whatever, right? And there's so many more people in society, I think, that deserve a $1 million plus paycheck. I got a buddy who's a veteran. He can barely afford to go get health care because of all the crap he had to go through serving 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, and he only made $35,000 a year.
Sure.
Getting shot at.
Yeah. I don't disagree with that take at all. And and that's where it always, politics always come into play and stuff. I agree completely. I definitely think we don't take enough care of certain people in our society, our veterans, our police, our EMT, our first responders. Those guys do a thankless job and get paid like it's nothing, and that's obviously an issue. Teachers, they should be making more, and it's like, I get that argument. I do, because I taught myself for 3 years at Wayne State. I know a lot of teachers. I've got a lot of friends that are police officers, and I know a lot of people that have served in the Army, a couple in my family, so all of that, yeah, I mean, that comes into play. I don't know if that's a fair analogy to use, though, comparing that to professional sports. Doctors, for example, if you're going in for heart surgery or something like that, you want this guy making as much money as possible because that's going to, give some indication that this guy's really good at what he does. That's, I think, the same with a lot of sports. The more someone makes it, or professions, the more someone makes in a specific profession is an indicator of their success and warrant of that. And again, I think, it just goes down to, well, do we want separation? Do we want, can you afford to pay, I think this ties into like minimum wage laws, like I mentioned a little bit ago, do you want people making X amount of dollars for professions that maybe don't warrant X amount of dollars? Now, on the flip side, that could be thrown right back at me and go, well, is a professional athlete warrantable of X amount? If we're not paying it and we're choosing to either take in that sport either through the TV or through attending the game, then, I don't know how you can complain about it.
Probably not. I don't know. I think I like your comparison though of a doctor, but to me, I think the line there draws in. A doctor spends 12 years in school, learning so much, spending so much money.
Sure.
And a lot of these athletes, they get scholarships and their school's paid for them. And I know a few basketball players have come right out of high school and gone into the pros.
Sure. No,
so
I get that.
The comparison there to me is that's kind of where that cuts off, because they're not spending 12 years in school and $200,000 in student loan debt and everything else to get to that level.
Yeah.
That being said, I do see the amount of skill it takes to do something like that. I can't do it. I'm too fat and slow to run on a football field.
I'm right there with you.
So I do get that end of it, and I do think that the more skilled you are, the more money you should make, and I'm totally on board with that. I think we're getting excessive with guys at work. We're talking about somebody just signed, I think it was like a $42 million contract. I think it was in football or maybe basketball. I don't remember. But $42 million to play a game, to me, is just this insanity.
Well, I think, it's hard to disagree because, we're talking about numbers that, we can't put into perspective. We can't fathom. You could take the same logic or the same questioning and do professional athletes make too much money? And you could apply that to movie stars. What's, the real skill from, learning lines and acting in a movie. I probably got a better shot at doing that than I do jogging my ass up and down a basketball court,
Yeah, they do.
So, I think there are certain things we could apply this same question to, but and that's where it's like, there's different classes in society. These people are at a completely different level. That's why it's entertainment, because it's not something that the vast majority of society can do. And, 42 million, yeah, that's an absolute buttload of money. Like, I only need like 1% of that, and I could finally pay off my student loans, and I might be able to see retirement at some point in time. And then you see I think one of the biggest issues, especially in today's world with social media and everybody being able to just be in everybody's face, is, you would hope somebody that's bringing in $42 million a year or a seat or through a contract, whatever it is, that they're, upstanding citizens, to be able to look at towards role models. And what we see on social media are people flaunting and throwing it around and, showing off the lavish houses and the cars and all that kind of stuff. And I think that doesn't help the bitter pill to swallow with the everyday person.
Oh, no, I completely agree with that. I think that's probably one of my biggest problems with this whole thing is I would love to think that these people are making this kind of money are going to use it to then do something great. And there are athletes that do that. I can't think any off the top of my head, but I know there are some, I've heard of them, that take the money and they start charities or they donate to things or do all of these great things with the money. But then at the same token, you've got this guy who buys a $300 million or a $3 million home and like Bentleys and Lexuses and all this stuff and pants that are like more than I make in a year.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
pants.
Well, and that's, if I can give a shameless plug to the podcast, the Light Traffic podcast and NASCAR, that's one of the many things that I love about the sport that I do my show with is that, race car drivers, and that's a whole nother topic for debate if these guys are even considered athletes. I firmly believe that they are, but, these guys are making just as much money, if not more, as some of your football and basketball and baseball, hockey, and whatever. And you, in my opinion, they do it with a little bit more nicer head on their shoulder. And, those are the guys, like, for example, some of the charities that these guys do, Joey Logano, for example, he brings a kid to the track each week that maybe has a disease, an illness, something not curable. He gets him his own little mini fire suit and gives this kid, the weekend of his life at the track. There are just so many things that I see that the NASCAR world and the NASCAR drivers do so much better personally, I think, than some of the other professional sports. Don't get me wrong. It's not that there aren't other charities and things like that. I know Matt Stafford's got a charity. I know a lot of these players have charities and do things. I just think some of the way they go about flaunting some of the other stuff, hurts their credibility. And like we said, it comes back as viewed as a negative, like, dude, you're making X amount of money, man. Could you dial it in a little bit and, act a little bit more humbled, I think would be a good way to put it.
Oh, yeah, completely. I think that's probably the best way to say it is humble would go a long, long way in, I think, changing my and hopefully other people's out there. I hope I'm not the only one in the entire world that has this opinion.
Oh, but I know you're not. There are a lot of people. I've gotten into this debate with a lot of people, which is why I was like, I want to do this topic. I really like this topic because, I come about it from, I try to be as objective with things as possible. That's partly my nature and, like I said, I'm working on a PhD in political science, and I try to present things as objectively as possible. But that said, I don't have an issue with capital markets and the private sector and those things driving forces. I argue a lot with close friends and family. Back in my early day, I used to do the whole political rants and arguing on social media, and I don't do that anymore. It doesn't help anybody. I'm not going to change anybody's mind, and that's one of the biggest issues with social media. So I've stopped that years ago, and it's made my social media experience a lot better. But that said, there are certain political facets that you could apply to this question that could be argued from either side.
Oh, completely. Side note to that, I haven't stopped doing that. I just moved my medium from social media to a podcast. So I still argue with people. I still debate. I know I can't change anybody's mind, but I still love to argue and debate.
Well, this is a lot cooler platform, I think, than social media or ranting on Facebook. Like, you tell somebody you got a podcast, and that just, talk about not being humble, something I just said. But, man, somebody, I'm in Berkeley. I've got 2 bars that my buddy owns that I can walk to, and you get to go up and just talk to random people. Oh, what do you do? Oh, well, this is what my day job is. But my really cool thing is I got a podcast, and people let me talk for an hour about myself, wanting to know about the podcast. Like, it's the coolest hobby in the world.
Oh yeah, completely. I love it. That's why I still do it. So to change directions here for a second.
Yeah.
I want to look at, so in ancient Greek and ancient Rome, right, they had the Colosseums, they had the gladiators who were athletes. And you can look through history, and as sort of the collapse of that society came about, those gladiators became more and more wealthy, more and more higher and higher in society, I should say. Is that not something we should be concerned about in our society as these athletes become bigger and bigger celebrities and are making more and more money? Is that not a sign of us just being distracted from the real issues and the real problems by this guy who makes $3 million a year to carry a ball versus the crap that our government's doing that's hiding this, that kind of like what the Romans did?
Dude, yeah, that is an awesome question. I think that and this maybe is a problem with sports. I think everybody, most people in America they're overworked, they're overstressed, they got a lot of worries. So for someone to sit down for 3 or 4 hours on Saturday and Sunday and watch, football or basketball, whatever your sport of choice is, and to allow that to be your escape, from the overwork, the stress, the bills, all that kind of stuff. That's, maybe that's the negative side to privatization of things, because, then that baseball team or the MLB or whatever sport it is takes advantage of that, right? Because, hey, we've got you in. So now we get to know we're getting eyes on the sport on the TV, butts in the seats, and we know you're struggling, but, we're going to price this just enough so that most people can afford to come every once in a while to a game, and capitalize on that, right?
Oh, yeah. And I think that's another thing that we haven't hit yet is the price of tickets and concessions and all those things. My dad is a sports fan. He goes to football games and stuff. And I guess the football stadium here in Atlanta is one of the cheapest as far as concessions go. But I know he's got friends who go all over the country, and some of these places are charging $20 a beer for like a regular 8-ounce or 12-ounce or whatever it is beer. And that's insane. And that's probably, in my opinion, where a lot of this money comes from to give to these athletes is you and I, who are only making $40, $50, $60, $70,000 a year, are basically paying these guys salaries.
Sure. A lot of the salary money comes from revenue from, the TV agreements and advertising, whether it's in the stadium or on the TV. The $20 beer isn't covering the full salaries, but it's definitely adding to the pocketbooks of the owners for sure. And that's another thing I'm just going to boast about my sport on. You can bring a cooler full of beer in, man, and no questions asked. So, that's another cool thing about NASCAR. But no, I travel. My buddies and I, we do one road trip a year for Lions football. I've been to a couple different baseball stadiums. And yeah, it depends on where you're at and how new the stadium is, depending on, what the beer price might be. I just got back from Minnesota a couple weeks ago for Garth Brooks and US Bank Stadium there, a couple years old. And man, they're charging, I think it was $15 for, a 32 ounce or whatever it might be there, astronomical prices. Part of that makes me wonder too, like, all right, obviously once you're in the stadium, you're going to pay. But I also wonder, and this is like a completely a side note, I wonder if some of these higher beer prices are just to control consumption to a degree. Like at some point, you're going to throw the towel in and be like, man, I just had 4 beers at $60. I could have bought like 8, 12, 24 packs for that price. Like, I wonder if that just helps control consumption in there so that they don't have fights breaking out in every section, but I don't know.
Yeah, I can see that. That would make sense to me. And I kind of like that angle on it better than the whole
right
charging the common man to play the payer. So
yeah,
play the player.
So it's fine. Random side note, what part of Atlanta are you in? Because I've been down there a couple times. I've got some friends that do a podcast. I've been to Atlanta Motor Speedway. It's I love Atlanta. It's a great area.
I am unfortunately almost to Alabama. We live way, way west of Atlanta.
Okay, cool. All right, yeah. I've not been to that neck of the woods.
Yeah, you're not missing anything, honestly. The only thing out here is Six Flags, and beyond that, it's all like just crap.
Nice. But so for example, I'm a Lions season ticket holder, and everybody asks, why are you a Lions season ticket holder? And it's so, I have the second to cheapest seats at Ford Field. And it's $1,000 basically, a little more with, convenience charges for the whole season. And the reason why I invest in that is not because I'm some diehard Lions fan. I'm actually a diehard Patriots fan. And what started the Lions season tickets for me was my wife, when we were dating, one Thanksgiving, the Patriots were playing the Lions here at Ford Field. And my wife now, bought tickets for us to go to the Thanksgiving Day game. And that started a tradition. And that tradition got a little pricey when I'm like, we're paying $300 on the secondary market, sometimes more, depending on who they were playing, to go to one game a year. For $1,000, I can get tickets to every game, selectively go to the ones I want and sell the ones. Like it just didn't make sense not to. We weren't going to stop our tradition. So it just made sense to do the season ticket package. And like I said, it's not like I have, 50-yard line seats. They're upper bowl in the end zone, So it's like, but again, it's something that I choose. $1,000 could go a long way in something else throughout the year. But that's something that I choose to invest in that a sports team is being able to take advantage of.
Yeah, well, I think there's value in entertainment, right? I think no matter what your chosen entertainment is, there's value in that, and I think that's probably where this whole debate falls apart. Is you're getting a value that may or may not be equal to the cost of the player, right? If you look at it as I can chill and relax and turn my brain off and just enjoy this beauty that is this sport, because I wholeheartedly think there is a tremendous amount of athleticism and beauty in any sport, right? But it's that value that maybe that I can't think of the right word for it right now, the unquantifiable value that you're getting from it.
What I value going to a Lions game as a season ticket holder is going to be a different value than somebody that goes to one game a year. That person may hold extra value to that because it's not something that they're doing on a regular basis. Where for me, I don't go to hardly any Red Wings games. So I might value that more than someone that goes to the Red Wings game a little more. So I think it all just depends on how often you do something. And I'm not saying that in terms of whether or not you can't afford to be able to do it, but maybe that's not where you choose to put your entertainment dollar. I don't go to the movies. I hate going to the movies. Like, if my wife is able to drag me to the movies once a year, like, she's like hit the jackpot on that. Like, I just don't understand going and sitting 3 hours and spending $15 on a tub of popcorn, but yet I'll justify going and spending $15 on a drink at Ford Field, So it's just all on what you consider value for your hard-earned dollar.
Yeah, so to throw my hypocrisy out there a little bit, I'm a huge music fan. I've been played in bands. I go to concerts all the time. For me, I don't have any problem with a band like Metallica or Garth Brooks or anybody making $10, $15, $20 million a year. But on the other side of that coin, I tend to have a little bit more of an issue with a player making that. So I can see how that argument of where you put your entertainment value is valid, because I will support. I will go buy every time Metallica comes to Atlanta. I'm going to that show because that's who I grew up on.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I think, again, just to kind of reiterate what you just said, it's just, what you consider value for your money, traveled to Minnesota to go see Garth Brooks. That's how awesome that dude is, and ended up going both nights, because he's just an awesome entertainer, great music, and love it. I honestly, I spread it out as much as I can in terms of, all right, music and sports, and love going to comedy shows. And again, I think it all just kind of ties back into, I'm going to assume most of your listeners are in that, middle class range. It's like, dude, I just spent 50 hours a week doing something I can't stand, and I got to go forget about it for 4 hours.
So that's a good point. I think there's a level of, and I can only speak for me at this point, but I think there's a level of jealousy in making $20 million a year and getting to do something they absolutely love to do. This is something they did as 5, 6, 7-year-old kids for free that now they're getting paid millions of dollars to do, and love every minute of it, or hopefully they love every minute of it, right? I would personally.
Well,
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, that's the thing, right? You hear most athletes say, I get paid to do what I love to do, which is awesome. But then, and I also get how it's really hard to take this into perspective. But the Detroit Tigers, for example, are atrocious. Baseball, longest season, 162 games, right? The Tigers are going out there, and I can't watch 2 innings of Tigers baseball right now. It's so bad. And these guys are out there making a lot of money, right? But man, from that perspective, right? Like everybody has a bad day at work. And I think that's what's hard for the average person to keep into perspective. Granted, they're athletes. Granted, they're playing a sport. They're getting anything you get paid to do is work, right? They're getting paid to work. And from that perspective, this is where I try to be objective. And it's like, man, it's got to be hard for that guy to go out there and play and struggle through night in 3 hours of getting your ass handed to you right now. Like, again, it's hard for us to put into perspective because you're making so much money. But on the same token, they're having a bad day, just like we have bad days. They, as much as they're compensated well to do what they do, they probably need to decompress with something outside of sports when it's their off season.
I think so. I think there may be a good point there. I also think that we're missing out some other. Sorry, I can't talk tonight. It's one of those days. I think we're missing another very valuable idea or a point here too, is the amount of damage these guys do to their bodies. 162 games a year, that has got to create wear and tear on your body. And so if you take the $20 million or whatever it is a year and divide that over a lifetime of medical bills and everything else, it may not be as much money as we like to think.
Sure, 100%. I think more people look towards the NFL with concussions because that's such a much more violent sport. I mean, if you look at that and just look at it, all right, the NFL, if we're just looking from a regular season perspective, is 16 games, and you compare that to another professional sport that's only that baseball that does 162 games, and then you throw postseason on and the grapefruit league. I mean, you're looking at almost 200 games of baseball if you're starting mid-February for your preseason, and if you make it into the pennant race or something like that, it's 200 plus days out of 365. Like you said, that's tolling on the body. And then, you look at the NFL with these guys and their concussions, that, again, it's a decision they choose to make. They could say no. I don't know. I would say no. If I was a physical beast of a human being and I was back in my early 20s, knowing the risks, would I turn down that kind of money? Probably not. I would probably take that risk because knowing that I could take care of my family and for probably a few generations to come, that's something that I would think I would do.
Oh yeah, I know I would, without a doubt. If I had that talent and that ability, I would do it in a moment.
Absolutely.
But I do think that there is something to be said though for the amount of abuse those guys put on their body, and looking at it from that perspective, I hate to say it, but I can see where the value of getting that much money every year, because I mean, I don't know what they pay for health insurance because for all the stuff they do, or if the player or the team pays for it or whatever. But even after you retire, somebody's got to pay those medical bills that are going to come from baseball, the torn rotator cuff or whatever I hear about all the time about from pitchers, and Tommy concussions Brown, and all of those things that come from all of that has to be. I mean, just think about somebody who works a desk job and gets carpal tunnel, right? That's an expensive bill.
Sure.
Now you're dealing with something way, way higher up on the scale of pain and difficulty to treat.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and another thing too is, we're looking just kind of like, how we do at a lot of things. We're looking at gross earnings. We're not looking at net earnings. And even though still the net side's still probably pretty good, but you hear $50 million contract for 5 years, $10 million a year for whatever and whatever sport. We also need to take into consideration that, hey, there are some hefty taxes coming at earnings that high. Dude's probably got an agent that's getting a nice chunk of change. Probably got an assistant. There are a lot of people that are taking a cut before the paycheck clears. And again, I understand that paycheck amount's still pretty high, but these figures that we do here are gross figures, So that is something too that should be, I think, taken into account when talking about something like this.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. I definitely think the money they're taking home has got to be less than what we're actually seeing when those numbers come out when they sign those contracts.
Absolutely. It's funny. I think when Miguel Cabrera signed his big contract with the Tigers that we're all now kind of regretting, and granted he's still with the team, but he's not producing. I forget the dollar amount that the total contract was for in the years, but when you averaged his number of at bats a season, based out over the number of years and the amount of money, every at bat it was going to average out to like $350,000 or something like that, or no, maybe 50,000. A lot of money, 4 or 5 figures just to step up to the plate each time. Like it was absurd just to hear that, and that's again, I circle back around to, we're talking figures that we can't fathom. We wouldn't know what to do with. It would be like if we were to hit the Powerball or the Mega Millions or something like that. Like these are life-changing numbers that it's hard to think realistically about.
Oh yeah. So it's funny. I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan. Side note, I am so pissed at how that ended. Anyway, but
I'm glad I didn't invest time into that show.
I'm mad I did. But I say that because I was reading an article that the woman, I forget her name, but she plays the Cersei Lannister. She was making $1 million an episode this season. And the second to last season, or the second to last show, all she did, she stood in a window and drank a glass of wine. And she made $1 million to stand in a window and drink a glass of wine. Right. So
yeah.
You got to put that into perspective too. And I think too, that's another thing. I think entertainment, actors, musicians, I think lump into this category too. I think not just athletes, but I think we talking about entertainers, right? Sure. In the idea.
Yeah, no, I completely. So to kind of to go along with that, I was a big Bang Theory fan, and the 3 main cast stars on that were making $1 million plus their last couple seasons, and there were some episodes where they weren't in it that much, and that one I wasn't upset. I thought they did a nice job with the season finale on that one, or the series finale on that one.
I love that one. I don't have cable, so I'm waiting for it to come out on Netflix or somewhere that I can stream it and watch it, because I love that show too.
Yeah, they did do what they were supposed to do. They tied everything up nicely, and the show ended, and I felt satisfied.
Good. That one will hopefully make up for Game of Thrones.
Nice. Yes. Yeah. I literally have not seen an episode. The only things I've heard about Game of Thrones in the last 2 weeks were something about a Starbucks cup on a table and how awful the series finale was.
Yep, that pretty much sums up season 8 right there. Which to me that also kind of plays into what you were talking about with the Tigers baseball team, right? These guys are still making $1 million plus, and it's crap. But whose fault is it that it's crap, right? Whose fault is it that they're making all this money, but they're not producing the level of work that we would expect, right? Because I'm assuming at this point, we're assuming that it is work to them. They're getting paid. It's a job, right?
Sure.
So
yep.
Whose fault is it that they're making all this money, putting all this time and effort and work into something that isn't of the caliber that it should be? And if that's the case, and if they're working that hard and not producing, where does the accountability come into that? Do they lose money on that? Like if I wasn't producing at my job, I'd get fired or get demoted. Is it their fault they're not producing, or how do we want to play that end of it, I guess?
Well, so I guess the difference probably between you or I in that perspective is they work under contract, and I don't work under contract. I'll assume you don't work under contract. So I think that probably plays a role into it. And the fact that teams are obligated to follow certain salary requirements and designations to where they can't just offload everybody. And, we're letting everybody go, and we are going to start from scratch. The leagues have some rules and restrictions as to, how you can let a player go, when you can let a player go based on contract verbiage and that sort of thing. So that plays a role. Where, for example, the Detroit Tigers are taking a hit is, 4 years ago on a Wednesday night, they were drawing 30,000+ people to the stadium. The announced attendance figures I have been hearing are between 10 and 15, but that's just because supposedly those are the tickets that were sold. I can tell you with confidence that there are roughly, probably about 5,000 people attending a Tigers game. So if you're the Illiches owning the Detroit Tigers, your pocketbooks are taking a hit. You are not bringing in as many $15 beers or $10 beers. You're not selling the concessions. You're not selling the apparel. You're not selling as many tickets. So from that regard, I think the accountability comes down to owners and having to put in the right coaching. And that's a big thing. And it always ends up coming down to coaching because the owners aren't going to sell the team. MLB isn't going to come and say, hey, you have to sell the team because you're not putting X amount of people into the stadium, or you're not, your win-loss percentage isn't at this. So it's going to come down to the owners saying, all right, well, we're going to put a new manager in place. And then it's the manager, well, we're going to rebuild and we're going to so the accountability, I think, in professional sports, obviously different from the 9-to-5er type gig. But I think that's in a very loose perspective, how they try to hold accountability and where accountability falls. Because I'll tell you, the Illiches would much rather have 30,000 people and a lot more beer sales than the 5,000 people that are coming in.
Oh, definitely. So where I was going with that is, do you think that it would change the sport, any sport, if we started holding players accountable for their play on the field, as opposed to just giving them X amount of dollars no matter what happens? Like if you weren't producing enough revenue, we'll call it, for the team, your paycheck takes a hit. Would that not incentivize guys like in a regular 9-to-5 job where you get bonuses for your level of output? Yeah, could that not work the same way?
Yeah, well, so like, for example, like I know there are bonuses worked in, not that these guys need a bonus, right, in terms of numbers and stuff like that we've been talking about. But there are production bonuses and there are incentives like, hey, if the team makes the playoffs, you get, a certain amount, or if you make the championship game, if you win the championship, you get bonuses. So they actually kind of do have extra incentives already built into these massive contracts to a degree. I think but their salaries are still to somewhat guaranteed depending on what sport we're talking about. So I think to do a complete 180 on that and make it like, hey, your salary is going to be dependent on your batting average. If you bat, under, 220, you're only going to make X. And if you're between 220 and 270, I don't, and if we go to football, if your completion percentage as a quarterback is between, 49 and 52, I don't know tiering things would work from a professional sports level because we're so far into this and what we're at now. And the fact that all of these leagues have player unions would never let anything like that go through because, the unions are there for the players because the union makes money, which helps, it's a vicious circle, but I like where you're going at it in terms of tiering it, but I don't think it's something that would be realistic in today's professional sports.
Oh, no, I don't think so either. But I do think that changes the nature of the game tremendously.
Oh, yeah, it definitely would. It definitely would. You would, like, for example, like if we go back to the Tigers and their struggle, you can kind of see not 100% effort out there. And it's because they're struggling. They know they're going to struggle. They know they're in a rebuild. And they're really, a guy doesn't run to first and maybe could have beat it out, but maybe they're not running it out, and if you were held a little bit more accountable for doing that, that could change things a little bit.
Yeah. And I think that accountability is naturally built into other forms of entertainment. Music specifically comes to my mind, right? If Metallica puts out Saint Anger, for instance, and it doesn't sell, they're not going to make that huge paycheck because nobody's buying the album. If nobody's buying the album, nobody's coming to the tour.
Sure.
Their paycheck decreases. Whereas that accountability and that level of output isn't built into athletes as much. I'm sure if I suck for 3 or 4 years at whatever sport, I'm probably not getting another $10 million contract.
Right.
But it's going to take years. It's not going to be immediate. Oh, crap, I didn't put in the effort to this. Now I'm losing money.
No, that exactly. That's the thing. There's such a lag in terms of when it actually starts to hit the player. That's why after their first rookie signing, they want to go get paid bank in case they do struggle or they do get injured. Your second contract in most professional sports is typically your highest paid one. And in most cases, it's also your last. If you look at the longevity in the average sports player, the NFL, I think the average tenure is only 3 seasons. Your Brady's, Breeze, those are your exceptions to the rule that add to the outlier. But it's also those guys that are also the outlier in the earnings too. You look at what the average lineman versus your wide receiver and your quarterback are making, and then you look at what the practice squad is making. I think a lot of focus just goes on the stars and the key players on teams in across all the sports that kind of throw some of these figures. Like I said, they skew them a little bit.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I know in I think it's hockey, the average rookie salary I think is $500,000, which to take that much damage to your body, and granted they're younger players, but it still has a damaging effect to the body, and only make $500,000. Granted, that's a huge number, but
sure.
In the aspect of what it's doing to you and how long you're going to play, I don't think it's as lucrative as we want to believe, right? Especially if 3 seasons in football, if you get $1 million a season, that's $3 million for the rest of your life to have to deal with the amount of damage and just pain you're going to have to live with.
Absolutely. And that's the thing too, we talk about the one and done rule in college basketball because they go to the pros. NFL, you typically are going 3 to 4 years, and you are for the fourth wall, put in quotation, air quotes, you're getting a college education, you're getting a degree for the most part, right? That's why these players aren't getting paid, because of you're getting a free education, and that's where that's what they're putting the reward for going and all that, and that's a whole nother debate there, right? But that said, when you look at what these college guys are doing that then go to the pros, and if they get hurt or injured and they're one of those guys that maybe only play 2 or 3 years and only made 2 or 3 million, odds are they're not skilled in anything else. And it's probably very difficult for them to go and find something else to do. Granted, I would like to think I can make 2 or 3 million last a lifetime, but in the grand scheme of things, if you're 22 years old, and you got to stretch 2 or 3 million out over 30, 40 years, that's really not a lot of money without some really good, smart investments. And as we know, these guys don't make the smartest investment choices.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So I hear my children screaming in the background. So I hate to do it, but I think we may have to cut this one a little bit shorter than normal.
Nope.
But I do like to give everybody that kind of joins me the last word on this. So giving you the last word, what do you think? Are they worth the 10, 15, $20 million salaries every year?
Oh, I think they are subjectively worth that. For me, someone that likes sports and likes to get my entertainment value out of that, and since I'm not cutting that full salary check and maybe only a small portion in my ticket price or concession sales and that kind of stuff, yeah, I don't have a problem with it. We talked about really early on, are there other professions that need to be making a lot more? Absolutely. But if we're just talking professional sports, hey man, I enjoy it as a hobby. I enjoy to watch it. So yeah, I mean, if there's money for them to be made with it, then hey, by all means.
Yeah, I have to say I have to agree with that, because entertainment value versus damage to the body, it's probably a fair trade-off.
Sure.
In the long run.
Yep.
So before you go, I want to give you the opportunity to tell everybody where they can reach you, your show again, and just kind of tell everybody how they can find you again.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you for having me on. This was fun. I'd be happy to do it again. So I am the host of the Lapped Traffic podcast. You can follow on Twitter at Lapped Traffic PC. I do a weekly NASCAR show that I talk about all three series of NASCAR trucks, Xfinity and Cup. I have tons of different guests from drivers across all three series, media people within the sport, beat writers within the sport. It's never a boring show. There's fantasy, there's listener call-in shows. It's a lot. It's a ton of fun. It's on iTunes, Podbean, you name it, you can find it. The Lap Traffic podcast. And hey, man, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. We'll definitely, if you want to join me again, let me know. It'd be a great opportunity to talk again.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, man.
All right. Well, thank you. And we will talk to you guys again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, man.
Okay. So there it is. Is It Philosophy? Go to our website at www.isitphilosophy.com and leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you on Twitter and Facebook as well. Help us grow by going onto iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts and subscribe. And take a moment and leave a review. Until next time, question everything, seek your truth, and don't be afraid to speak your truth.